It's time for the Bible Geek.
Robert M. Christ. We don't really know for sure what is and what is not.
Holy Ghost.
Yahweh. God blast them on the spot.
Ghost.
Yes, friends, it's time for the Bible Geek. Interpretation. Star. Jesus. Homiletical. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Bible Geek, Robert M. Price here. It's December and about 10 days till Christmas. And as you know, though not a theist, I love Christmas. And in fact, to me, that is the line in the sand. If to count as an atheist, you got to stop celebrating Christmas, include me out. It's great. All right, let's see. I wanted to mention a couple of things. Some good news, I think, on the religious front. The Vatican issued some sort of a document saying that Catholics should not seek to convert Jews to Christianity, that Judaism is not really an alien religion to Christianity, but rather sort of an elder brother, and that sounds good to me. There was a real farce going on for a long time with so-called interfaith dialogues that were just excuses for Christians to try to get Jews to jump ship and come aboard, amazingly. But apparently the party line is no more of that, and sounds good. I noticed the second thing is utterly unimportant, but happened to be watching some Food Network cook-a-thon or cook-off thing, and it was holiday treats, and so there were Christmas things, but they also had a Hanukkah dish competition, which of course is good. I'm always glad to see some airtime given to Judaism, and they brought out Duff, what's his name, the guy that had the Charm City cake thing for a while, and he said that being Jewish, he was the expert on Hanukkah cooking, and of course it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but sincere as well. But I thought to myself immediately, this guy is the champion of Judaism. I remember a few years ago on one of these shows where they had different Food Network chefs talking about favorite dishes. This guy's there eating a batch of shrimp heads. I mean, come on, talk about a Levitical nightmare, and he's the one representing Judaism. Boy, I tell you, that's great. Well, at any rate, how about some Bible Geek questions? Enough of them have piled up while I've been working furiously on Holy Fable. Just finished my chapter on the prophets, and boy, that turned out to grow like the blob. I thought that might be a short one, foolishly. Luckily, it is not. It's one of the longest chapters. You're going to love this book. This book is sort of everything I know about the Bible, or surmise. Wait till you see what I do with the spaceship scene in Ezekiel 1. Anyhow, let's see here. And speaking of books, the Paul Tillich collection I edited is now available on Amazon. I don't have any copies of this to sell myself, so you'll have to get it there. The book is called The Ground of Being, Neglected Essays of Paul Tillich, and it's got a preface by Tillich's pal, Thomas Altizer, he of the Death of God, and I wrote an introductory essay as well, not just some little bitty, hope you like it, but rather an actual essay on Tillich and deconstruction. And if you're a theology fan, I think you'll like it. The stuff by Tillich, never reprinted since it appeared decades ago in obscure and defunct theological journals, is of considerable interest, too. There's just an awful lot to be learned there. So, please pick up a copy. What a great stocking stuffer for the theologian on your list. Okay, let's see, Justin has written in, oh, great geek, just a heads up concerning the Revs question on the episode from November 4th concerning Bible version parallels. Instead of spending money on a text copy, do try using BibleGateway.com. They've always had many versions of the Bible in many languages, including modern Hebrew and Greek translations, and recently added in functionality for a side-by-side comparison of any two versions you like. I love Bible Gateway, by the way. I've used this when working with students who spoke Spanish as their first language by pulling up Spanish language editions, and also with students who have questions about the Bible in general. Often I use it on my own to compare translations, such as Young's literal to the RSV, or even to try my hand at searching out a particular bit of Hebrew when I want to know what word exactly is being used in a verse. Though not speaking Hebrew, I usually don't get far. Also, while I'm suggesting items for your listeners, I recently came across a book called Tree of Souls, The Mythology of Judaism. More than any other reference work I've used, this book has touched on issues commonly discussed on the Bible Geek. I was so entranced by it when I found a copy in my library that I eventually went out to buy a copy of my own. A good used edition will go for about $20, and I consider it a very useful resource. Ooh, that sounds good. I got to get it. On that note, I have a question. In Tree of Souls, there's a whole section on myths about the Messiah. Many of these myths deal with the two Messiahs, one Messiah ben Joseph and one Messiah ben David. I think this goes to explain a lot of the oddities in the Gospels, such as Jesus' denial of being the son of David. And there goes my screen again. Okay, the need to have a father named Joseph, even though he wasn't the real father, because the virgin birth had to be, in my opinion, shoehorned into the story. Yeah, I think that is the origin of the Joseph, the father of Jesus, because Jesus is Messiah ben Joseph, the Galilean Messiah. Anyway, my question is, do we see this two Messiah expectation again and again in the Gospels? Is John the Baptist a first Messiah and Jesus a second? Several scholars have said that. Is Jesus a first Messiah and the Paraclete a second? Very likely Bultmann points out that the Paraclete looks like it fits a broader pattern of Near Eastern Gnosticism, where there are two prophets. One appears first off and gives an exoteric public version of the revelation, and after him comes the one that gives the esoteric interpretation, which makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, let me go back to the question here. Was Christianity always going to be stuck with the expectation that there would be a Messiah who died and then another who would bring in the Messianic age? I know many Jewish counter-apologetics deny the Messiahship of Jesus on the basis that he did not bring in the Messianic age or even raise armies to fight Israel's enemies, but there's certainly wiggle room in the tradition. However, I would say, Justin, that there is still a bit of a problem. The Messiah ben Joseph was supposed to die for Israel's sins on the battlefield. Like, by dying, he would, like the sacred king used to do, answer for the sins of the people. And it was the sins of the people, even according to the rabbis, that kept the Messiah in heaven, waiting and waiting and waiting till Israel deserved liberation. And once Messiah ben Joseph took the punishment, that opened the way for Messiah ben David to bring about that liberation. Well, so it would be a bit of an adjustment, number one, to say that Jesus' death on the cross, distinctly not as a warrior, would fulfill the mission of Messiah ben Joseph, though maybe that happened. I mean, the whole idea that his father was named Joseph implies somebody was saying that he was the Messiah ben Joseph. But still, you'd have a problem. Judaism would still be right in that no Messiah ben David followed him in Christian thought. That there's, even if some early Christians thought that there would be a second Messiah on the old pattern, that then where is he? I mean, Messiah ben Joseph is sort of a preliminary bout, you might say, but to stretch out a couple of 1,000 years at least between the two messiahs, that seems to just be too much of a strain on the concept. By the way, as Geza Vermesh suggests, I think in Jesus the Jew, an unbelievably fascinating book, the Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David thing may have come about in the wake of the defeat of Bar Kokhba in the early 130s. What was it, 136 CE or AD? Because he was proclaimed the true Messiah by Rabbi Akiba, but then this Messiah was defeated and killed by Rome. So what do you make of that? Was he simply wrong? Vermesh says it's would make a lot of sense if they found, rather than writing him off as a false Messiah, if they said, well, maybe there are two Messiahs, and he was Messiah ben Joseph, and we can still be looking for Messiah ben David. I sure wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if there's any way to verify that, but that's kind of the way it is with most of these things we discuss. So, yeah, it's a very interesting model to apply to the New Testament. But if Vermesh is right, then, of course, it might be a little too late for a lot of the gospel stuff. But who knows? Because you do have another double Messiah notion in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where there's the Messiah ben David and the Messiah ben... what is it? No, they say there is the Messiah of Aaron and the Messiah of Israel, a priestly and a lay Messiah. That's earlier. And in Zechariah, you have the notion that Zerubbabel is the Messianic king and Joshua is the Messianic priest. In the Testament of Levi, you have the idea of a priestly and a royal Messiah. So the idea may well be older. Okay, this next one. And remember, BibleGateway.com, that is an amazingly helpful research aid. Let's see, here's kind of a long one from Caleb. Back to the top. Oh, geeky one. I've been thinking lately about the story of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, if that's how you say it, and there are a couple of curious issues I'd like your take on. When I was younger, I paid especially close attention in my church's youth Bible class when we were told the story of Caleb and Joshua being sent to scout out the Canaanite territory, mainly because I was excited to be named after such an action hero rather than some boring New Testament figure like my siblings. Yet after reading the story more recently, I find that it differs markedly from what I was told as a youngster. Caleb initially appears in Numbers chapter 11, and these quotes are all from the translation by John Nelson Darby. Don't hear that too often. There, Yahweh tells, Numbers 13, tells Moses to send a man of every tribe of his fathers to search out the land of Canaan. Numbers 13:2. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, is chosen to represent the tribe of Judah. Numbers 13:6. When the chosen scouts return, they confirm that the land is rich, but they're afraid of the inhabitants: Anakim, Amorites, Hittites, Canaanites. Numbers 13:12. 27 through 33. Caleb alone speaks in favor of conquest. Verse 30, I find it curious that Joshua is not mentioned during this scene. In fact, it's not entirely clear that he was even sent with the scouts to begin with. He was not named as one of the tribal representatives chosen by Yahweh. Instead, after Yahweh names the representatives, it states, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to search out the land. And Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun Jehoshua. And Moses sent them to search out the land of Canaan, and said to them, go up this way by the south, and go up into the hill country. Numbers 13, 16 through 17. The only line that mentions Joshua in this chapter appears like an interpolation to me, perhaps as an attempt to weave together two separate histories of how the Israelites came into Canaan. I think you hit the old nail on the head. In the next chapter, it says that the people of Israel bemoan their fate at being sent to a land full of hostile inhabitants. This time, both Caleb and Joshua, of them that searched out the land, speak in favor of conquest. Numbers 14, 6 through 7. The Israelites then state that they should be stoned to death, prompting Yahweh to tell Moses that he will destroy the Israelites. Numbers 14, 10 through 12. Moses then pleads with Yahweh, who eventually relents, saying, I have pardoned according to thy word, but as surely as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of Jehovah. For all those men who have seen my glory and my signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me these 10 times, there's a sign of a redactional summary, and have not hearkened to my voice, shall in no wise see the land which I did swear unto their fathers. None of them that despised me shall see it, but my servant Caleb, because he hath another spirit in him, and hath followed me fully. Him will I bring into the land whereinto he came, and his seed shall possess it. Numbers 14, 20 through 24. Immediately following this, Yahweh gives another speech proclaiming that the Israelites will all die in the wilderness, and shall in no wise come into the land, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua the son of Nun. Numbers 14:30. Why wasn't Joshua mentioned earlier with Caleb? It looks to me like the second speech may have been a later addition designed to weave together two separate narratives, as it is largely redundant. Yeah, bingo, I think you're right. You gotta ask, didn't we just hear this? I mean, that really comes into its own, that kind of analysis, with the flood stories in Genesis, right? Why the heck is this thing so repetitive? Well, of course, it turns out that it's neatly divisible into J and P sources. And I think you got the same thing here, and you do seem to have a version where Joshua has been added, just like Aaron has been added to many of the Moses narratives. I found some commentaries online that state that Joshua wasn't mentioned initially simply because he wasn't at that point among the people, as he was a constant attendant of Moses. But this just seems like unwarranted harmonizing. There seems to be a similar kind of ambiguity in Joshua chapter 14, where Caleb recounts the tale as he requests his land, his allotment from Joshua. With all this in mind, I have 3 related questions about the story. First, is the presence of Joshua as one of the scouts likely a later editorial redaction, as I mentioned above? Yeah, I certainly think so. You got to build up his connection with Moses and the whole thing. You're introducing him as a prophet like Moses, and Moses doesn't get to go into the land, but Joshua does, and let's have him do it first in the time of Moses while Mo is still around. Second, what's the deal with Caleb's ancestry? Yahweh calls him a representative of the tribe of Judah, but it often mentions that he is a Kenizzite. The Kenizzites are stated in Genesis to be one of the tribes whose land Abraham has promised, along with the peoples such as the Hittites, Amorites, and Canaanites. Genesis 15:19. Are they supposed to have intermarried with the Israelites in the meantime? Might this be a sign that the story of Caleb conquering his land from the Anakim was originally screen blackout. Yeah, it was originally a local legend among some Kenizzite tribe that was later incorporated into Israelite history as the Israelites migrated into the region. Under this theory, both the legend of Caleb and that of Joshua would have been connected at different times to the tale of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness through this story of Moses sending scouts into Canaan. That could well be. I think the case is rather like the Kenites, who were a kind of Midianites who seemed to be allies of David and to be part of the kingdom of Judah. I suspect that's what's going on. I think you're right. Third, what does it mean by saying Caleb hath another spirit in him? I checked multiple translations, and they all state something like another spirit or a different spirit. When I searched through the Darby translation on BibleGateway.com, there it is again, for this phrase, it only appears in that one passage. I found commentaries interpreting this as meaning that Caleb was filled with the Holy Spirit, whereas others say this simply means he had a different, more courageous temperament. There we go. From the other Israelite scouts. I myself speculate, perhaps feverishly, that this may be another indication that Caleb was originally from a separate, older legend told by polytheistic Canaanites, and that the phrase another spirit is referring to some kind of semi-divine abilities, like Nimrod and the heroes of old. I'd be interested in whatever thoughts you have on this, as well as any sources you recommend. Maybe I should be checking out Moses and minimalism. To tell you the truth, Caleb, I forget what the heck I said about that. Might be worth looking at. You'd also enjoy Ignaz Goldzier's book, Mythology Among the Hebrews, where I believe he goes into mythological background of Caleb. I could be wrong, but I think that's correct. To tell you the truth, I do think hath another spirit in him does mean he's of a different temperament. I think of a similar thing in Luke, where Jesus and the disciples are on the way to Jerusalem, and they want to stop at the hotel in Samaria, and at first they're okay with it, but then they find out that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, which of course the Samaritans didn't care much for, given the long-standing hatred between Jews and Samaritans. And they say, I'm sorry, we're all booked up. And so they have to go ahead and hit the road again. And James and John are really upset about this. And they say, Lord, don't you want us to call down fire from heaven and barbecue these bastards just like Elijah did, those pesky Samaritans? And Jesus says, you don't know what sort of spirit you are of. I think it says literally, which I guess means you partake of or you belong to. The Son of Man came to save men's lives, not to destroy them. And I think that's the point. He says, it's sort of similar to when he says to Peter, you mind the things of man, not of God. Like you're in the wrong groove here. I sort of think in the context that's really what it means, that he's not a coward. Like in the pastoral somewhere, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. I think it's that kind of contrast. But again, Goldzier probably has some good stuff about the original Caleb. Yeah, very good. You're an attentive reader. I keep thinking I should get a copy of Darby's Bible. Of course, the famous founder of the Plymouth Brethren sect. Okay, here's from Dr. Barton. I thought I'd take a minute to address a couple of questions from the 15045 show, if you will indulge my non-Reuven-esque knowledge of the Old Testament spirit world. Evan asked about the burning bush at Mount Horeb. Why did God choose to manifest in that form? I believe that the answer to that lies in where Moses thought he was going according to the variant tradition presented in Exodus. The short answer to this question is Eden. As I believe that I've pointed out before, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to do so, Moses led Jethro's, now his flock, his congregants, into the desert to Mount Horeb. If you read Genesis 3:24 carefully, what is normally translated, "And he placed at the east of the garden cherubim and a flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the path to the tree of life." A more careful translation of this passage, in my opinion, would be something like, "And he placed at the entrance to the garden cherubim and a scorching sword which swirled about to guard the path of the tree to the tree of life." Shakan means to place, but it can also mean to dwell and even to establish a tabernacle. It also, don't you love that word, tabernacle? It also sounds like a card game of some kind. It also, in my opinion, derives from the same root as sukkah, which can mean shelter, thicket, booth. While kadem can mean east, it can also mean entrance. While lahat can mean flaming, it has a broader meaning of hot, scorching, fiery. I consider this distinction important because I believe that at least one Jewish tradition understood it to imply, when linked with swirled, the scorching, dry winds of the wastelands in the Middle East. Interestingly, it can also mean to hide with mystical implications. The word used here for sword is chereb, which, while spelled with a CH instead of a K, still bears a significant phonetic similarity to kerub, K-R-U-B, transliterated, the spirit. I don't believe that that similarity was unintended by the original writers, and is probably why many people understand this passage to say that a cherub with a flaming sword guards the entrance, while the actual passage says that more than one cherub and a swirling flaming sword guard the entrance. So how does that relate to Moses and the burning bush? Moses ventured forth into the desert, a place where swirling, scorching winds are known to cut like swords, in search of Mount Horeb, which sounds suspiciously like chereb and kerub. There he comes to a holy place with a burning bush or hedge. No mention is made of surrounding cherubim in the Exodus 3 passage, but I think that the strong implication is that Moses was trying to find the garden which, according to Isaiah, I believe, I think that's Ezekiel, is on the mountain of God. If this conjecture is correct, then there is a further implication to the burning bush. Moses has encountered an area where he may not enter without proper purification, in this case removing his sandals, upon pain of death. He finds a flame that is presumably surrounded by cherubim. This sounds suspiciously like the description of the Ark or altar of the covenant, wherein two cherubim cover the space between them, which is symbolically the throne of God, which is often understood to simultaneously be the mountain of God, Mount Sinai or Horeb. I admit that the imagery is a bit mixed up. I don't know if that is par eidolia on my part, or confusion, possibly deliberate obfuscation on the part of the writer. Either way, I think that the idea that Moses was seeking the garden and therefore the mountain of God is almost inescapable. That is really fascinating, Doc. I hope you're working hard on that book and that you're going to stick this in there somehow. That is really, really interesting. Very fascinating. I got to do some thinking about that. Then again, Dr. Barton says, Dave asked about the leavening of the Pharisees. The probably quick answer for him, leaven represents traditions in the Jewish world. Even today, good sourdough starters are handed down from generation to generation in some families. They're a piece of a family's heritage. That was probably the symbolism behind the proto-Hebrews being told to leave their leavens during the Exodus. It represented leaving behind a heritage of slavery and forming a new heritage as a new people. Thus, the leaven of the Pharisees was probably the tradition of the Pharisees, even possibly the Talmud. Sheesh, you got a sharp eye. As a couple of interesting side notes, leaven, chametz, is seen to be alive, a fact obvious from its bubbling and ability to multiply. Sort of reminds me of Anthony Rudd's classic horror story, Ooze. Anyway, because it is alive, but there is no blood to be drained from it, it is not an acceptable offering on the altar of God. Matzah, because it is unleavened, is an acceptable sacrifice. For anyone interested in this, let me save you going down a rabbit hole with the King James Bible, which I use a lot because it's linked to Strong's Concordance. By the way, you know, the old remark Merrill Tenney, the Wheaton Bible professor, made, they call the two big ones Strong's Concordance and Young's Concordance because you got to be young and strong to carry either one of them. And I think he was right. He was a wonderful man. I had the opportunity to meet him back in 1975 when I was taking some courses at Wheaton. Let's see now. Yeah. Leviticus 2:11 has a serious and persistent misspelling. It is not a meat offering, oh my gosh, but a meal offering. The misspelling is an English copy error and not a translation error. Oh my gosh. It is corrected in most other translations of the Bible that I looked at online, but it persists, oh no, persists into the New King James. Weird. Yet another. I tell you, this is the Dr. Barton Geek today. Fine with me. The parable of the dishonest steward. It is possible that I mentioned my interpretation of this parable before. For my interpretation, it is important to remember that at the time this was inserted into the gospel, the early church was trying to dig its way out of failed apocalypticism. Obviously, selling all that you owned to live in a Christian commune was not working when the world didn't end. To me, it was important to note that the steward was not accused of stealing from his employee, but of wasting the employee's or the steward's goods, Luke 16:1-13. The fact that the employer was planning to dismiss the steward instead of jailing him and still trusted him enough not to confiscate the house's financial records from him immediately suggested that the employer was not happy with what the steward was doing with his own, not the employee's finances. I suggest that the implication is that he was involved in a Christian commune and was perceived to be getting involved in Christian communism. When the small c communism, obviously, when the steward sorted out the books by convincing his employer's debtors to pay up at 50% of value, the original interest rates may have been very steep, he showed his employer that he could still operate shrewdly in a world that still required money. In more modern terms, he showed that he could have commie leanings and still be a good, freedom-loving capitalist. Thus, the parable was intended to draw communism-minded Christians back to the material world by showing them that God expected them to earn their own damn way right up to the second coming. Fascinating. That is a new one, as far as I know. That's quite interesting. You really have the eagle eye. What you're doing, Dr. Barton, as I just said, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to ever be sure that you got the definitive take on anything in the Bible. And so you have to fall back on what I think Stanley Fish said, or somebody, that, I think it was he, that the best you can hope for is a strong reading which generates new reading and commentary and perspectives. And that really well sums up what I am looking for in biblical studies, new possibilities, because it simply is not possible to get definitive results about much of anything. I always say that with regard to the Christ myth theory. I favor it, but I certainly don't hold it as a dogma. That would be utterly absurd. And in fact, I think you could say the same about any historical Jesus theory. It's always a paradigm, a thought model, and that's about all you can say. But you're saying it very well. These are fascinating interpretations. Yeah, let's see. Is this... Oh, yeah, okay, another question from Alexander, the PhD student in Ohio. I recently went to a presentation here by a PhD student, an evangelical Christian who was seeking employment at Wheaton College. Oh, brother, was it full of problems? But two things in particular bothered me that I wanted to ask the great Geek. The first was that he claimed that the Bible was written to convert the masses. During the Q&A, I asked him what the basis of that claim was, because it sure doesn't read that way to me. What does the Geek think? Well, there's a couple of... there are some parts of the Bible where that wouldn't be that misleading a characterization. The Gospel of John is just, overt, saying that, well, I picked the material here in order to convince you that Jesus is the Son of God so you can have life in his name. Well, that's pretty obvious then. Luke says right off the bat he's compiled his account so that you'll know the truth of what you've heard about. Which could be aimed at clarifying things for someone who was already a Christian believer, or to close the deal with someone who is thinking about it. I think the books of the prophets are Deuteronomic products that are, with their polemics against idolatry and polytheism, are really aimed at diaspora Jews who are assimilating to the religions of their neighbors, as like not renouncing Judaism, but combining Judaism with other elements. Like we have a sarcophagus from Egypt in the early Christian centuries, where you've got the menorah and the wheel of the resurrected Attis, stuff like that, right? And I think that the basic poetic core of the prophets is, to which a lot of other prose embellishment was added. The main idea, I think, was they were texts read to diaspora Jews who had come to Jerusalem for the festivals, much like this scenario in Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost. So that, in a way, is a kind of an appeal to convert people to monotheism, but that's a little bit more nuanced than what this guy was saying. But what he's saying sounds like a common confused assumption that fundamentalists have, that the Bible is an evangelistic tract. You read enough of it and you're going to accept Jesus as your personal Savior, an idea that does not even occur in the Bible in my reading of it. Okay, the second thing was that he used the term the church to refer to any and all Christians living in the United States, in the same way as the Chinese American church, the church in China. Oh boy, it gets under my skin when people say that. I don't think it's too problematic to say the church to refer to the structures of early Catholicism in the 3rd century, but it just seems like such a gross generalization used today. I doubt that Seventh-day Adventists would appreciate being called part of Mother Church by Sunday churchgoers. My feeling is that apologists use the term the church to paper over interdenominational differences and to implicitly say, actually, they all agree with me, or they should. What does the Bible Geek think about the term the church used in this fashion? Well, I think it's equivalent to saying the Christian community, though it's more of a theological version of that, right? It's sort of implying the Ephesians business of the mystical body of Christ into which baptism initiates the individual believer. And it still means the community of Christians, but with that mystification added. I don't see a problem with that. I mean, it does raise the question of who exactly is thought to be a member. Would evangelicals think the Adventists belong in it? These days, probably, yeah. I mean, Ben Carson is a favorite of evangelical Christians who must know the guy's a Seventh-day Adventist. Christadelphians, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses certainly wouldn't be shown the door by evangelicals, but that's really a different question. Who belongs to it? The church as the mystical body of Christ. I'll tell you one thing that I really don't like is when preachers address the congregation as church. I don't know if I have any particular reason for that except that I'm a big individualist and do not appreciate being subsumed in a mass that presumably all thinks the same thing. So I'd have a problem with that, but I don't see anything inherently objectionable in this theological collectivity idea. But I think you're right, that student was grossly oversimplifying to the point of being misleading. Jason Garlow, boy, you know, I got a great nickname for you. How about the Great Garlow? Because there was this terrific monster toy in the early 60s, the Great Garloo. I don't have that one, but I have the little teeny version that came out a few years later, Son of Garloo. So the Great Garlow, you might want to think about it. Anyway, the popular YouTube video called From Theism to Atheism mentions Elyon being originally the Canaanite god that eventually morphs into the Hebrew god. Is there any validity to this claim, or is it internet misinformation? Or a better question, is it plausible? I also wanted to know if you had any suggestions on books that the layman can pick up on to better understand the history of the Bible, Jesus, and Christianity. I did search up some, but a lot of the reviews said most are really tough to understand. Well, I think that claim about Elyon is correct. Because God, the Hebrew is El or Elohim, and that is simply the same word that appears in Ugaritic, the Canaanite language of ancient documents that we have that were discovered in the 20th century, where the high God is El, E-L, transliterated the same way. And he had 70 sons, the sons of El that appear in the Bible a couple of times. As to his title, the highest God, El Elyon, that's the same name as Baal had, who was the son of El. And he is called Elyon Baal, the highest Baal. It's the same. It's spelled usually transliterated A-L-Y-A or O-N, but it's the same thing from Hebrew to Ugaritic. And so, yeah, and in fact, in one place, in one of these documents, El says, the name of my son is Yah, Y-A-W translated. He's Yahweh. And just like in Deuteronomy 32, it has Yahweh as one of the many sons of Elyon. So I think that's right on target. As to books to suggest that there are about early Christianity, I think Bart Ehrman's book, Lost Christianities, would be very good. It's a kind of a readable version or counterpart to, I don't want to say it's a popularization in the good sense, the sense that I'm trying to do with many of my books, trying to make it accessible without bastardizing it. It's a sort of a popularized version of Walter Bauer's great book, Orthodoxy and Heresy in Earliest Christianity. And I think that'd be a good one, Lost Christianities by Bart Ehrman. One that takes it's more orthodox and yet critical and filled with fascinating information would be Henry Chadwick's The Early Church, which is a Penguin paperback. That is just endlessly fascinating. I think he could use a dose of Walter Bauer in the early days, but that's why I say Ehrman and Chadwick would be good to read together. I think you'd find both of them fun to read and very, very informative. And of course, Bart has also done various books on the historical Jesus, one in which he's understood to be an apocalyptic prophet and so forth, which is certainly a viable view. I don't happen to hold it, but that doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, one more from Jim K. Recently, I was reading a very irreverent yet hilarious book. You say the yet as if there's a contrast there. A hilarious book entitled The Story of God, a biblical comedy about love, then in parenthesis, and hate, by Chris Matheson. The book is a sort of behind-the-scenes look at God's various decisions in the Bible, second-guessing himself all the way. There's one story in the book about God coming to earth to have dinner with Abraham and how much he enjoys eating meat. The story, I know I do. The story mentions Genesis 18 as the basis for the story, so I got out my Bible and started reading. Hallelujah! Genesis 18 appears to be a story about Yahweh and his two angels visiting Abraham and actually eating dinner with him. And the story also contains what I believe to be an unintentionally hilarious argument between Yahweh and Sarah over whether she laughed when Yahweh told her she would bear a child. She's outside the age of childbearing, which is why she laughs and why it requires Yahweh to perform a miracle to fulfill the prediction. Yeah, right. It says, why did Sarah laugh? She says, oh, I didn't laugh. And, oh, yes, you did. Okay, am I reading this right? Did Yahweh, God, sit down to dinner with Abraham? You bet. Also, I think the modern Christians interpret these God as human Old Testament sightings as Jesus. Is that what you've heard as well? Well, Jim, I have, and I think that's close to being right in that these are theophanies, that is, manifestations or appearances of Jehovah. And like these other stories of the angel of Yahweh appearing to Hagar or Samson's mother and so forth. And Margaret Barker has a very attractive theory that that's what early Jewish Christians thought Jesus was, a theophany of Yahweh or Jehovah, the son of Elyon, whom Jesus refers to as his father. The thing that virtually clinches this is the point she brings up that though Jesus is called the Son of God, which of course reflects Elohim in the Old Testament, he is never called the Son of the Lord, right? Which would be Yahweh or Adonai. Now that, why not? Unless they understood Jesus to be the Lord, the Kurios, Yahweh or Jehovah. Very, very interesting. So rather than read Jesus back into the Old Testament theophanies, I think she may well be right that you have to interpret the New Testament Jesus in light of those Old Testament theophanies, that Jesus is one more of them, perhaps the greatest. So yeah, there is a relation. It's just not quite what they think. The emphasis is on the wrong syllable, as one says. Okay, I got to get going, and I much appreciate the interest all of you show in the Bible Geek. It's just great to have this community willing to put up with my nonsense, and I'd like to thank folks for their financial support. And as I am on the verge of losing my position, as minimal as it was, at Johnny Coleman Theological Seminary, that really blows quite a hole in our family budget, and therefore I'm more eager than ever for your largesse. Again, however, if you can't or don't want to, don't you think twice about it. And please keep sending in those questions. And I got plenty more to answer, but I always like to make the rain barrel fill to overflowing. So I'll see you next time on another exciting episode of the Bible Geek.